Welcome everyone. We will discuss macroeconomic policy on the subjects of inflation and unemployment in this unit. And today I will start with briefly introducing first an outline. So I will talk about the introduction section of this unit today. Then we will discuss macroeconomic policy overall, and in particular fiscal policy and monetary policy in other videos. Now, to introduce the subject, let's look at the economic activity in the United States. So we see considerable fluctuation in output in the history of the American economy. So you see from 1870s here, you see the GDP growth presented with this black line. There's lots of ups and downs. On the y-axis, you see the GDP growth rate presented from negatives to positives. So anything below zero is representing a recession briefly, or broadly speaking. And anything above 0% is an expansion in economic activity. What really stands out is up until the Second World War, the end of Second World War, you see the jumps from 0% to a positive and negative values much more frequently and much sharper, right? So you're seeing a sharp increase in growth rate followed by a huge decline, and there are some considerable collapses in economic activity that can reach all the way up to 10%, above 15%. And this type of decline and expansion in economic activity is somewhat less observed from 1945 onwards, right? So you see from the Second World War, end of Second World War onwards, the growth rate is much more stable, and it's stable both in regards to the expansion. So we see more positive growth rates, and when we see decline in economic activity, it's never reaching to a very sharp decrease of 5–10% or something above that, right? So we are seeing modest decline in economic activity from 1945 onwards. Another thing we see here is we are representing the size of the government. So this is the amount of tax collected apparently, and you see a steady increase in the size of the government from 1870s to 2020s. So persistent increase is present for the size of government, and as it passes the threshold, it also corresponds to a time of stability in overall economic activity. Now, one reason why we have so much variation before the Second World War, particularly in late 19th century, so the 1870s onwards, is it was a time where we had a lot of agricultural activity dominating the overall economic activity. And the matter with agriculture, at least back in the day, is that it was reliant on the weather events a lot. So a very hot summer or very rainy autumn could have caused the crop to come out in a very particular way, and that may have an implication for how much is produced, how much is sold, how much we'll be able to employ, feed. It was very much reliant on chance events, if you will, that were out of the control of the farmers. That affected the economic activity considerably. But you need to keep in mind that in 1870s we have the employment in farming, agriculture, around 50% of overall employment. So the share of employment fell from 50% in 1870 to a 20% in 1930 for agriculture, right? So you have less and less people employed in agriculture through time, and you still have considerable variation, right? So in 1930, around here, you start seeing one of the largest jumps. And of course, one needs to keep in mind this is corresponding to important Second World War and other worldly events. But despite that fact, the stability is not something that's present for the most part. And the big reduction in the magnitude of the fluctuations did not occur until after the Second World War. So post-Second World War, we see somewhat more stable economic growth performance. And the figure shows another important development here, right? The increase in the role of the government in the economy. And we are showing it with using total government tax revenue as a share of GDP. So the tax revenue here is increasing all the way up to 30%. And as it passes the threshold above 20%, we start seeing some stability coming to the economic activity. Now, obviously, these are not strictly causal relationships. But one needs to keep in mind there could be something to say about the, first of all, fiscal policy, what the government's doing with these taxes, but second of all, monetary policy. So what the government is trying to do with stabilizing the overall economic activity post Second World War. So that's going to be our focus in this unit. So they will discuss the difference between fiscal and monetary policy to address what the government does. We will explain how fiscal and monetary policy tools can be used to limit the impact of such shocks, and explain how policy responses and economic outcomes differ for demand shocks and supply shocks.